whiplash. With one tweet, President Trump sends a House vote that was not expected to be dramatic into chaos. It is the most recent example of President Trump leaving lawmakers in his own party confused. Former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman is with me. So is Matt Miller, MSNBC Justice and Security Analyst, also former chief spokesman for the Justice Department. And we have another Matt with us as well. Matt Welch is editor-at-large at Reason Magazine. Mr. Miller, let me start with you. What are we to make of the proverbial monkey wrench that the president threw into the FISA discussion today?
I think we've seen, and not for the first time, that this is a president who really is completely disengaged from the actual running of government. People I know like to say, you know, the president tweeted this morning in conflict with his own policy agenda. But I think what we're seeing is that the president doesn't really have a policy agenda. I mean, the president's purpose of being president is to, you know, kind of live tweet Fox and Friends and other Fox News shows, to attack people, to start fights, and to be talked about on television. And to the extent he has any, you know, real policy agenda at all, he wants bills to pass so he can say that he did something, but he doesn't really care about the substance of them. And so you see these examples where, you know, this entire, you know, controversy over the FISA Amendments Act, and I won't say, you know, there are people who have serious objections to it, but that's not where the president's coming from. It all goes back to the president's, you know, odd Saturday morning tweet early in 2017 when he accused the president of tapping the phones in Trump Tower. For everything we know, that turns out not to be true. It led to this unmasking controversy that was a way to sort of justify his tweet. And they see it carrying through today, where he, in another early morning tweet, he almost upends the legislative process and kills a critical national security tool. This is obviously no way to run a railroad, no way to run an administration.
Matt Miller just alluded to another cable news outfit, Matt, that we don't necessarily watch here. But you think that perhaps what we saw from the president this morning via Twitter was perhaps motivated by the president watching some television?
I would bet my life savings on it. At 7:30 some odd this morning, Judge Andrew Napolitano, who's a great civil libertarian and who doesn't like all the warrantless spying that the government can do to us, which we've just passed, unfortunately, he turned to the camera during Fox and Friends, which is the president's favorite show, and addressed the president himself and said, "President," and as part of this, he couched his objections, Napolitano's objections, to the FISA reauthorization with language that the president would get, which is that, you know, conflating it a bit with the Russian investigation. That is not the real objection to the FISA warrantless spying on Americans. We've seen since the Edward Snowden revelations in 2013, we shouldn't have, in my opinion, the federal government, the National Security Agency, be able to spy without a warrant on millions of American citizens. However, canny politicians like Rand Paul and other people figure out that they can get the president's ear if they start with, hey, what about this Russia witch hunt? And then hopefully maybe they'll get this thing. Unfortunately, Justin Amash and other people in the Freedom Caucus, other civil libertarians, they introduced a reform bill earlier this morning. It did not pass. And then this thing did pass, ultimately, the reauthorization, with the support of 55 Democrats, I might add, who, if they had voted a different way, wouldn't have gone that way, which I think is unfortunate. But I think what we're seeing is that people are trying to game the president's attention span to get their own bills
We
passed.
saw Lindsey Graham, the senior senator from South Carolina, in that round table photo op that was convened earlier this week, use some language that we've heard from this president. It does sort of make you wonder whether smart lawmakers have now figured out that if you use certain catchphrases to communicate with Donald Trump, you might get what you want.
You play golf with a man and you say, you know, and you make Lindsey Graham's effort to refer a prosecution of the progenitor of the Steele document. I mean, it doesn't have teeth in it, but it's a symbol that the president can be, oh, great, I like Lindsey Graham now, even though Lindsey Graham and John McCain are inseparable on their policy beliefs. My feeling is that Lindsey Graham is trying to get his defense reauthorization like he likes and foreign policy gains that he wants, and this is his price for doing it.
Seth, let's turn to Russia here for a moment. The president, as you know, previously said that he would be more than willing to talk to Bob Mueller, and then all of a sudden yesterday, this is what we heard from President Trump.
It has been determined that there is no collusion, and by virtually everybody. So we'll see what happens.
But again, would you be open to?
We'll see what happens. I mean, certainly I'll see what happens. But when they have no collusion and nobody's found any collusion at any level, it seems unlikely that you'd even have an interview.
So Seth, what happened? What do we know about what changed in terms of the circumstances between when the president said he would in fact testify and then yesterday standing next to the president of Norway?
Sure, I think the answer is time. I mean, that was a number of months ago when he's saying 100%, I'll be there, I'm ready to be questioned. And now we're looking at the real possibility of that happening. And when that becomes real, and that is a different environment than him speaking to the public with a teleprompter. I mean, being in that room with Robert Mueller and the FBI agents testifying under oath in all likelihood is a very different situation. His statements can be the basis for perjury charges. If it's not under oath, they could be a basis for false statements to a federal agent, which is also a felony. And so he'll have a very difficult decision to make at that point. Does he testify and have to be truthful? And if he is not, then he faces the peril of a criminal charge, or plead the fifth. And the political ramifications for pleading the fifth, will be left to the American people and potentially Congress if it ever got to impeachment. So I think the change has to do with the timing. We're much closer, although I don't think we're quite there, but much closer to a potential subpoena from Bob Mueller's office to the president seeking his testimony under oath.
Matt Miller, the president, again, also right there we heard it, continues to insist there was no collusion. There was no collusion. I think we heard it 7 times yesterday. And he also indicated that Democrats have been saying now that there's no collusion. Have you heard from Democrats who've said that there's no collusion?
No, and I've been following this pretty closely and listening, and I haven't. Look, the president ignores a couple things here. One, the fact that a member of his campaign staff was told on April 26th of 2016 that the Russians had stolen emails. We don't know who else in the campaign he told, but I think we'll find out one day that that information went very far up the chain of command. A couple months after that, in June, his own son was promised dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. And then Trump, in that same time frame, made a series of public utterances that were completely not in keeping with traditional U.S. foreign policy, saying that he wouldn't defend our NATO allies potentially in the wake of a Russian attack, saying all of these things that seem to really curry favor with Vladimir Putin, and then publicly encouraged him to release Hillary Clinton's emails if he had them. So some of this collusion kind of has happened out in plain sight. The other thing I'd say quickly that it ignores is that the president isn't just under investigation for potential crimes that happened in the 2016 election. He's also under investigation for obstruction of justice. He never mentions that when it comes up, but there is, you can point to a series of activities that come very close to the line, if not go over them into a criminal charge. And I think, he obviously tries to ignore that. And, I think that also plays into, why he's so hostile to doing this interview.
Matt Miller, Seth Waxman, and Matt Welch, a big thanks to all of you. Thanks for your time again.